Hi, everybody. Today is Friday, July 18th, 2025, and our friend Dmitry Orlov is back with us. Welcome back, Dmitry.
Good to be with you once again.
Before starting, Dmitry, how can we support your work and the articles you write on your website?
I have a very active blog with lots of commentary and at least a couple of articles a week published in English and French. Please follow the URL on your screen, subscribe. Lots of people there, and everything that we discuss on this program, I discuss in a great deal more detail with lots of facts and figures. So if you're curious to know more detail, please go to my website.
Great. I think that concept is so great. Yeah, to follow up on the interviews and just expand it more. Dimitri, I want to start with what the White House press secretary said about the 50 days that Donald Trump put on, I don't know, some sort of ultimatum toward Russia. He said that it seems that they're trying to reach a deal with Russia, but they're talking about a ceasefire that doesn't come to the Russian mind so far, that didn't come to the Russian mind so far. Is that achievable in your opinion by 50 days and how do you see the way that the Trump administration, you see a lot of pressure coming from Washington when it comes to the n- recent visit of the NATO Secretary General and meeting with Donald Trump and going to the way that Donald Trump is picturing the situation, that they're talking about sanctions. But overall, when you look at the 50 days as just some sort of deadline, what does that mean for Russia?
It means absolutely nothing for Russia because it's an ultimatum. It's The logic of it is that something happens within a certain period of time, not very specified. He's talking about a deal. What's a deal? That's not diplomatic language in any case. Um, and there's a definite deadline, and negative results will occur if a deal does not materialize by then. So that's an ultimatum, and Russia does not work with ultimatums. The Russian reaction to that is, "Who the hell do you think you are?" Um, so that side of it can be completely ignored. Now, Trump's head is sort of a random number generator. So it could be 40, 50, 60, 90. Who knows? Who knows what number will come out next? But in this case, it actually makes a little bit of sense because what will happen in 50 days? In 50 days, Congress comes back in session in Washington. And what do they have to talk about? The absolute complete disaster. That's the new uh, budget that will go into effect a month later in October. The fiscal year starts in October, and it's a complete train wreck. The budget deficit is actually just blowing up all of the finances, and on top of that, he's talking about taking direct control of the Federal Reserve by firing the Fed chairman, which is an unheard of offense against the independence of the Federal Reserve. And you have to keep in mind that there's no better way to kill the U.S. dollar than to mess with the Federal Reserve. That is the independence of the Federal Reserve, which is supposed to be sacrosanct, is the only reason that people keep lending money to the United States. They wouldn't be lending money directly to Trump. That would be ridiculous. But if Trump starts interfering with the Federal Reserve, then that's what he would be doing. So 50 days is the right amount of time for to elapse before everybody will definitely forget that the Ukraine exists. Definitely. No more Ukraine after 50 days. 50 days of nothing, of silence on Ukraine, followed by absolute mayhem in Washington, having to do with the new federal budget and also the mess with the Federal Reserve. And suddenly, Ukraine just isn't even on the radar. Who cares if there's a deal or not? So that's what that means. In terms of 100% tariffs versus what the 500% tariffs that Lindsey Graham wanted. Um, so one of the side effects of this is that Trump killed Lindsey Graham's madness. What is the difference between a 100% tariff and a 500% tariff? Well, that's like being the difference between 100% dead and 500% dead. If you're 500% dead, are you any deader? No, I don't think so. So, so he killed that deal. 100% is also a ridiculous number, and it's you know, Trump again is his random number generator in his brain. You know, the algorithm that he seems to follow in his decision making is what's called a random walk in computer science. If you don't have an algorithm for solving a problem, you just kind of randomly poke at it until maybe a number comes out. And that's what his brain is doing, I think. So he came up with a solution that A, does not deprive of the military defense uh, uh, contractors of the defense contractors doesn't deprive them of income, at least on paper. B, Americans don't have to pay for it because it's all Europeans who are going to be paying for it, not because they don't have money. Already, all the biggest ones said they're not paying for it. C, he's not supporting the Ukraine, which his people don't want to do, but he's not supporting the Ukraine because he's willing to sell weapons, and Americans are okay with selling weapons no matter who they go to as long as they get the money. You know, he's preserving American jobs sort of on paper again because again nothing will be happening, and so this is an absolute win. You know, this is a winning scenario on all sides as far as, you know, finally Trump comes out with something that is uh, a workable, non-workable scenario. It pretends to solve a non-existent problem by offering a non-existent solution, which is just fantastic. I'm so happy for him.
Dimitri, you mentioned that there is no difference between 100 and 500% tariffs, but I think Donald Trump learned that from the experience he had with China. If you remember when they got above 100%, China said it doesn't make sense for us. We're not gonna go above that because that doesn't make sense. That doesn't a viable choice for us. And on the other hand, he mentioned that if he goes beyond 100%, he needs some sort of approval from the Congress. But it's up until 100%, he doesn't need any sort of permission from the Congress in the United States. But after all, do you feel that is the United States? I don't know who's behind this sort of argument that because Donald Trump, if you remember Donald Trump before being elected in the United States, he was totally a different guy, Dmitry. He said that why do we have sanctions on Russia? What do we need to have sanctions on Iran? Why not? These sort of policies are destroying the US economy. What has happened to Donald Trump, to that Donald Trump, in your opinion? And why we are not witnessing, why we are not seeing the same guy in office when he's literally the president of the United States, but he tries to blame everything on Joe Biden right now. And that doesn't make sense for many people who voted for him, who supported him.
The United States is not a democracy, and it doesn't matter who is president. Any president, once he gets elected, gets shown a little video that nobody else has ever seen of John F. Kennedy getting killed from an angle that nobody has seen in the public. And after that, the US president elect becomes very obedient. He basically says what his handlers tell him to do. So that's what happened to Trump. That's what happens to every US president. Basically, there's a system in place for managing U.S. presidents, just like there's a system in place for managing just about everything else. It has nothing to do with who gets elected. That's the short answer.
When we talk about the latest visit of NATO Secretary General and his meeting with Donald Trump, in which Donald Trump said that Europeans are buying these weapons, they're gonna decide about them, but we are receiving the money, we are benefiting from the deal. Do you see any sort of responsibility on the part of the administration in Washington? Somehow, I'm not talking about the nature of the deal. I'm talking about the responsibility of those people who are providing Europe with these weapons. They know that they're going to end up in Ukraine and somewhere else to make some sort of chaos. Where is that responsibility, in your opinion?
Nowhere. It's all about money. And where's the responsibility for that? Well, yeah, if you signed a contract to deliver weapons, then you're responsible for delivering those weapons and making sure that they sort of work. Not really, but sort of. Um, but beyond that, there's no moral responsibility. Um, there's no responsibility to pay attention to the national interests of any country, including your own. It's just really all about money. And Mark Rutte was basically there as a a flower pot, as a decoration, because everybody knows that NATO doesn't really exist anymore. Trump has said that the United States will not defend its European allies. You're all your own, boys. And so now they're conspiring amongst each other to sort of create some kind of a NATO substitute, which explains, the action, ridiculous action between Paris and London to sign some kind of a defense or cooperation deal. All of that all has to do with the fact that NATO doesn't exist. So Rutte was there basically to call Trump daddy, and I think he's going to, get a cookie or something. He looks, he really just looked ridiculous, and that what was being discussed was way over his head and having nothing to do with NATO.
So, what was that, in your opinion? If you believe that, what was that? What was the essence? What was the main goal of the meeting?
With Rutte,
Yeah, with Rutte. If we assume, do you feel it was all about the weapons going to Europe, or is something they were talking about something that maybe nobody was mentioning? I don't know if, because we've learned that France is not interested in buying those weapons. The only countries I assume so far they have shown that they're interested in buying those weapons are Germany and the United Kingdom. And we had a pact, a deal between the two countries, a military pact between Germany and the United Kingdom. In the new pact, they're talking about Russia as a strategic threat to them. How is that going to play out for these two European countries, in your opinion? Why do they need to picture after more than 3 years of the conflict in Ukraine? Why do they need that? Is that some sort of agenda to drag it on, the conflict? Even
well, no,
go
it has
ahead.
nothing to do with the conflict. First of all, the weapons in question do not exist. uh, Europe and the United States have pretty well stripped themselves of weapons. They've delivered to the Ukrainians just about everything they could. And as far as the defensive systems, those have been pretty much squandered by Israel by shooting at cheap little Iranian drones. Um, and so there's nothing to share. Now, the mechanism would be that the Europeans would give the rest of their weapons to the Ukrainians. Half of them would get blown up by the Russians, and half of them would end up on the black market. That's the pattern. And so they would be just completely defenseless and stripped bare. And then they would be allowed to order replacement weapons from the United States. Hello, here's our new pricing. Hope you like it. And our delivery dates are in 2027, 28. And meanwhile, please sit there and twiddle your thumbs or whatever, because you're not going to get any weapons from us. And so that's pretty much the plan. So that leaves Europe defenseless. They're feeling defenseless because there's no more NATO. NATO without the United States participating eagerly lacks logistics, lacks intelligence, lacks all kinds of necessary things. So it can't actually do anything, right? So these European leaders are feeling rather naked, um, and what they're facing is capitulation by the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians will eventually capitulate, they have no choice. But that doesn't really work politically for these European leaders who have thrown uh, tens of billions of dollars at the Ukrainian problem. And if what they end up with is capitulation and defeat, that looks bad for them. That ends their political careers. So they're desperate. They're grasping at straws. They're trying to come up with some kind of a solution where none exists.
In your opinion, in we know that Russia has expressed, Maria Zakharova yesterday talked about the way that European are just making coalitions, some sort of pacts, military pacts, and they're gathering. And is that a concern when they see that Germany is asking for long range missiles? It seems that the administration in Russia is somehow concerned about this sort of behavior on the part of, specifically on the part of Germany. Typhoon, Tomahawk missiles, they can hit deep into the Russian soil. But we know that, in my opinion, you have to be. It would be a pure madness to think that Germany would hit Russia deep into the Russian soil in Moscow, for example. But they can give it to Ukrainians. We know that how the situation with the Ukrainians, how they're just totally out of the hand, and nobody seems to care about that. I believe that everybody is enjoying what Ukraine is doing in terms of irresponsibility of the Ukrainian government. But how is that going to be perceived by the government in Russia?
Well, first of all, the Ukrainians can't operate this fancy long range German equipment. The Germans would be directly involved. And so that would pull Germany directly into conflict. They would they would have to operate from Ukrainian soil just to have the fig leaf of, oh, it's not Germany, it's the Ukrainians doing it. But Russian intelligence is good enough to know whom to blow up. When if Bundeswehr uh, lands on Ukrainian soil and starts to regroup and gets ready to strike, first of all, most of their long range stuff is launched from planes based in the Ukraine, where all of the military airports are freshly destroyed, and flying sorties over Ukrainian territory. They wouldn't dare to invade Russian airspace. Um, and even then, they're probably going to get shut down by the Russians. So the Germans are very unlikely to do any of that, but they'll talk about any sort of absurd nonsense because the alternative is to admit the inevitable, which is the Ukraine will be forced to capitulate. Um, Tomahawks, you mentioned Tomahawk missiles.
Yeah.
Those are launched from U.S. submarines, U.S. Navy ships, Aegis ashore installations, of which there are two, one in Romania, one in Poland, and aircraft, U.S. aircraft. So if the Ukrainians are going to be provided with Tomahawks, are they going to get a U.S. destroyer to fire them? Is that the idea? Is the U.S. giving the Ukrainians a destroyer? I haven't heard anything about that, or strategic aviation doesn't seem likely. And the other thing is that the Russians are very good at shooting down the Tomahawks. Even even the Syrians in the good old days were very good at shooting down those Tomahawks because they fly slower than a passenger jet. They're really old stuff. Um, So again, this is just all, much ado about nothing.
Is there any patience left in Russia toward Donald Trump? Do you believe that they still have some sort of hope or maybe some sort of critical thinking toward Donald Trump that they can achieve something with him despite all of these difficulties that they're experiencing with Washington today and these days? Is there, looking at the situation, in your opinion, your take on that would be Donald Trump is interested in achieving some sort of settlement in Ukraine?
Um, well, he may be interested or not interested, but he is not really, how should I put it? He's not in the loop. He doesn't know what's going on, and he can't process that sort of information. He has this clip mentality where he won't read a document longer than a page, and his staff prepares little videos that they call Fox News format, which he will actually watch. That he actually has the attention span to absorb the whole thing. But his deal is his kind of like his deal mentality, what he calls a deal, is not really applicable to complicated, thorny, diplomatic missions and initiatives. So he wants a deal, and the Russians say, okay, well, this is what is in our national interest, and this is our position, and this is what we have to achieve. And that's just like, in one ear, out the other. So the Russians say, well, we have to make sure that the Ukraine is neutral, is denazified, that all the Nazis in the Ukraine are put on trial and sentenced. Okay, and we have to make sure that the Ukraine is demilitarized, that there are no foreign troops on, except for Russian troops, of course, on Ukrainian soil, and that the Ukraine no longer participates in any foreign military blocks or formations, no training exercises, nothing like that. Those are Russian objectives. I wouldn't call them conditions. I wouldn't call them stipulations. Russia is like this big steamroller that rolls very slowly, but everybody knows where the destination is. Um, and Trump can't seem to process that sort of information. So he keeps talking about ceasefire, and the Russians think, well, okay, how will a ceasefire further our agenda, which is fixed? It's immutable, and that just bounces off Trump's head, and he goes back to talking about ceasefire. So, well, they didn't agree, so let's threaten them with sanctions. Threatening Russia with sanctions is pointless, absolutely 100% pointless, guaranteed not to change Russian mentality or behavior in any way, shape, or form. Well, okay, more sanctions. Oh, that didn't work. Let's try some more sanctions. That's the level of thinking that goes on, and it's rather pointless. So the Russians are seeing that, and they do see him as a sort of like a madman bouncing around in his padded cell, not really a statesman working at achieving a diplomatic solution to a very thorny, complicated, historically conditioned problem. And the longer this goes on, the less, I guess, the lower the expectations become on the Russian side.
We have the chief of the British General Staff. He went to Ukraine to talk with Sersky. When you look at the British and their attitude in Ukraine, do you feel that, in your opinion, is it the British Army and intelligence running the show in Ukraine at this particular moment, at these days, that Washington is less interested in Ukraine? They're trying to buy weapons for Ukraine. I'm talking about the United Kingdom. They're trying to do these sort of activities, sending the chief of the British General Staff there and talking with Sersky. We know that the latest operation on the Russian soil, nuclear bombers, was somehow directed by the British intelligence, maybe. And the Kursk region, what has happened in the Kursk region, the British was behind it, not, in my opinion, not that much the United States. It's somehow that it seems that as much as Netanyahu is capable of running the show in the Middle East, the British is running the show in Europe, and they're trying to do everything since Donald Trump took office, in my opinion. Your take on that?
By running the show, you mean
Yeah.
taking a disaster and making it worse? Yeah, I guess they're succeeding in that. The Brits are very interested in making sure to at least portray something other than their complete irrelevance. So yes, they're making use of this fact that the Ukrainians have been conditioned to um, say yes to anybody who flies in from the West and says random things, and they even pretend to do what they're being told to do, although usually with the opposite result of what's intended, such as in the Kursk region. You know, they lost 75,000 people and have accumulated giant dossiers, giant folders full of uh, terrorist acts and atrocities against the civilian population. And all of these will see prosecution. You can be absolutely sure that these people will be tracked down after this event is over, wherever in the world these people are. There'll be Nazi hunters, just like after World War II, except this time there will be Russian Nazi hunters all over the world. So that's what the British have achieved so far. They took a disastrous situation and they succeeded in making it worse. Maybe that made them feel better about being in charge of basically a collapsed empire. Um, you know, at least that they can still cause problems around the world. You know, that I guess that makes them feel better about who they are. But otherwise, it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless.
It seems that the German government under the Merz administration is much less hesitant when it comes to the new conflicts, when it comes to the escalation with Russia. Is that the case in your opinion, or is the same sort of attitude that we're witnessing with the Merz government, with the Merz administration?
I think Merz doesn't really understand what he's doing. I think he's completely out of his depth. He's a finance guy. The fact that he's actually Bundeskanzler now is uh, a problem within the system that propelled somebody so incompetent to that position. He's got uh, room temperature uh, popularity. You know, he's not the most popular person at all within the German government, and so he's trying to sound potent, whereas he's actually impotent. And so, from the Russian point of view, this is just some idiot in Berlin, you know, flapping his gums. Ignore him.
Dmitry, Maria Zakharova yesterday said that the administration in Kiev is not interested in having new round of talks between the two parties. On the other hand, Donald Trump is talking about the 50 days, as you mentioned, maybe a random number came to his mind to talk about. But after all, when you see the situation between Russia and Ukraine, how can you achieve some sort of settlement without having negotiations, without this sort of communication between the two parties? How is that going to make sense? Let's assume that Donald Trump is totally ignorant about what's going on. But after all, there has to be some sort of talks and negotiations if you're interested in reaching a political solution.
Okay, let's go through the mechanics of it. Uh, First of all, the Ukrainians have since, or the Zelensky regime, let's put it that way, has since said that maybe they'll have talks with Russia anyway. Maybe they're willing to have talks. Now, in terms of the talks that have gone on before, those were technical discussions having to do with the exchange of prisoners. The Russians have delivered tractor trailers full of frozen Ukrainian corpses that they've collected from the battlefield. I don't remember, something between 3 and 5,000 that they scraped together and identified and sent back. What the Ukrainians did in response is, instead of giving these corpses to the families for burial, they burnt them, they incinerated them, pretended that they didn't exist. So that wasn't very productive um, as a humanitarian action. Now, in terms of having actual discussions with the Ukrainian side, there's nobody to have discussions with. There's no legitimate constitutional government in the Ukraine. So there's nobody to sign any kind of a peace treaty or a ceasefire or anything. There is no legitimate government in Kiev to negotiate, for the Russians to negotiate with. That's very important to understand. They just reshuffled the whole cabinet, which is illegal under the Ukrainian constitution. So again, the only thing that the Ukrainian regime, the Kiev regime, is authorized to do is sign capitulation and leave office. That's it. That's the only thing that they could actually do, that the Russians would recognize as actual legitimate and legal action. So that's what we're waiting for, is capitulation. Now, in terms of what Donald Trump wants, well, he can want anything he wants, um, and he can even impose 100% sanctions maybe on China and India, who are the biggest buyers of Russian oil. Except that if he does that, the price of energy in the United States would skyrocket, and he would not be very popular. Um, and seeing as he has a huge problem with the next budget, I don't think he's particularly interested in causing that problem. So I think 50 days, he could actually say, well, progress is being made, so let's give it another 50 days. I wouldn't be surprised if he does that. Like I said, the random number generator, 50 days is just a number he pulled out of a hat. He could just as easily pull a number, any number out of his hat to follow up. It's like, oh, 50 days. That worked out great. Let's give it another 50 days. That was beautiful. Um, I totally expect him to do that.
Looking at those 33 points that Russia has in the negotiations with Ukrainians, I would argue most of those points should be addressed by the West, by the United States specifically. Not having the United States at the table, not having them negotiating, talking with Russia together with Ukraine, don't you think that's a bad idea, to not having the United States? If they all come together, the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, maybe considering Europeans who are somehow running the show, in my opinion, in Ukraine, that could facilitate, that could somehow accelerate the process of negotiations.
Well, like I said, there can be no negotiations, right?
Yeah.
These would be negotiations involving the Ukrainian regime. The Ukrainian regime lacks legitimacy to enter into negotiations with Russia. Any piece of paper that they sign is worthless. Therefore, there will be no negotiations. There will be capitulation. Another thing that you bring up is the Russia's various conditions. That was before. This Now something different could be required, because every time you deny Russia what Russia wants, Russia's conditions get worse for you. That's how the Russians negotiate. They give you a good deal, you turn it down, you get a less good deal later on. You turn it down, you get an even less good deal, until the final deal is bang, you're dead. And so the Ukrainians are at the bang you're dead stage of this process, and whether the United States has anything to do with it is I don't think relevant. The U.S. doesn't want to hear the word Ukraine. There are very few Americans left in government or just generally who have anything but bad feelings about the whole Ukrainian disaster from every angle. They want they want it gone. They don't want it on the agenda. Now, on the other hand, the European leaders, in all of their you know ridiculousness, after Zelensky made a horrible mess in the Oval Office with Trump, he flew over to London, as was received, and coddled and kissed and hugged, and so they went out of their way to make Zelensky their problem. So now Trump has granted their wish. Zelensky is Europe's problem. Do anything you want with him. You can hug him, you can kiss him, you can chop his head off. Who cares? Okay? Zelensky is Europe's problem, which is, I think, Trump's greatest achievement so far. I don't think well, he's also cut foreign aid, which he promised to do. And USAID is gone, which is great. But he hasn't really achieved very much. And this is one of the things he achieved. He made the Ukraine Europe's problem. And that's beautiful.
You're talking about the legitimacy of the government in Ukraine, and but is that without having, because they're not talking about any sort of new elections in Ukraine. How can they achieve something? Because in terms of negotiation and a settlement, as you mentioned, there has to be a legitimate government in Ukraine, which Zelensky and his administration, in the eyes of Russians, it, they're not legitimate. They're not the official party to the conflict. But how is that going to achieve? Nobody's talking about election. Not Russia is asking for, but Europeans don't talk about it. Even in the United States, you don't see any sort of sign that Trump or anybody in his administration talking about it.
Those elections would be impossible to organize because nobody knows how many people there are in the Ukraine anymore. Nobody's really counting the dead. Lots of people, hundreds of thousands of people are hiding from the government. They either ran away from the battlefield or they're hiding from being conscripted. They will not stand up and be counted. So basically, there will be nobody to vote. Nobody will vote. Uh, Nobody really wants to get elected at this point because you know it's the people who already have blood on their hands who the people will not vote for, and anybody who would replace them would not want to soil their reputation by being associated with this homicidal, genocidal regime, because offering to offering yourself as a candidate for an office in this government basically makes you a co-conspirator. So what sane person would want to do that? So really, the only sane thing to do with the Ukraine is to dismantle it as a country. It's no longer a country. It's just a bunch of regions, and those regions can then maybe regroup and vote on what sort of a government they want. Do they want to be run from the Kremlin? A lot of them would, because that would mean, you know, hot and cold running water, electricity, and food in the shops, and transportation, and all kinds of good things. Um, Reasonable salaries for school teachers and medics, etc. So there are a lot of perks to being a Russian that a lot of Ukrainians would kill for at this point, given how destitute and destroyed the Ukraine is. Question is, does Russia really want them? I don't think Russia really wants them. So that's a good question. What will become of this basically ungoverned territory? You know, there are a lot, but this is not an urgent. an urgent question. There are lots of failed states in the world. Look at Somalia; it's been basically ungoverned for what, several generations now. So maybe it'll be Somalia of the North, and nobody will really go there or care about it, you know. So that's how I see the Ukraine's future. Very, very rosy.
I think the point that you raised about Somalia is would be the case for Syria. They're somehow seeking some sort of similar situation in Syria. Is that the case in your opinion?
Well, no, Syria is a concoction. It never stood a chance as a country. It never could put together a system of majoritarian rule. So all they could come up with is an Alawite minoritarian dictatorship. Um, the moment Syria tries to become a democracy, it just disintegrates. Now that it has already disintegrated for a variety of reasons, it will stay disintegrated. Unfortunately, that doesn't uh, that won't produce good results for most of its population. That is a very sad situation. But there isn't much to do about it because the problem was in forming it to begin with. Just like with Israel, the problem was with recognizing a Jewish state in Palestine while neglecting to recognize at the same time a Palestinian state in Palestine. That that problem is with us many generations later. So these problems are very old and they will persist practically forever.
Dmitry, what has happened in the aftermath or during the war between Iran and Israel? Somehow you look at the mainstream media trying to smear, trying to somehow manipulate or draw a line between Iran and Russia and saying that these are huge differences behind the scene. They're talking about it mostly, those sources mostly come from Israel and Europeans, and nobody in Iran and Russia. If any unnamed, unknown sources, they're talking to the mainstream media in the West about the situation between Iran and Russia. What are they trying to achieve, in your opinion? What is in their mind when it comes to somehow they don't want a better, they don't want a good relationship between Iran and Russia, but with their attitude, what is the main goal? We know that they tried it with China as well. They did everything to separate China from Russia. And with the case of Iran, it's somehow, when you look at the Middle East, the West Asia, it's and connecting Iran to Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Central Asia, it's something big to the southern part of Russia. And for Iran, it's something so much important for the security of Iran. What are they trying to achieve, in your opinion?
Oh well, they're trying to paint their defeat in the dozen-day war, as I call it, as a victory. They were defeated, and now the results of that war are being worked out by Iran and the rest of SCO. Everybody has been briefed. Everybody understands what Israel's strengths and weaknesses are as a result of that conflict. And since Israel is only a proxy for the United States, all the weapons and uh, uh, pretty much the entire military of Israel is slaved to the U.S. military. This tells us the strengths and weaknesses of the American military as well. So those lessons are being learned. The big mistake that Israel that Iran made was not equipping itself with missile defense systems. If it had if it had uh, accepted Russia's offers to supply it with air defense systems, it would have been in much better position. It wouldn't have lost so many lives, and it generally would have been able to neutralize the Israeli attack on and block Israel from entering uh, the Iranian airspace in any way. So they basically flubbed that. They thought, oh, we could do it ourselves. We have good engineers. We could do something or other. And so what they ended up with was a disjointed system with no early warning capability that was very easy to circumvent and neutralize, which is what Israel did. But their big victory is that they have shown that Israel is just completely defenseless because their Iron Dome is ineffective against the more modern Israeli missiles. I mean Iranian missiles, and the stock of air defense rockets that Israel has, which are basically just American made, was very easy for Iran to deplete. Now, this was a demonstration exercise, this dozen-day war. It was just basically, uh, you know, probing from the Iranian side, just probing Israel's defenses and finding out that they don't exist. So at this point, it is known that Iran can destroy any object on Israeli territory at will. That is a very strong position to be in. Now, once Iran is equipped with adequate air defense systems, probably Russian ones, although China might also lend a hand, uh, Israel will have nothing and Iran will have everything. And so that's the outcome of the war. So what they're trying to do in Western press is portray that as something other than that. Voice, microphone.
In my opinion, what Russia has learned during the conflict in Ukraine and Iran is learning by this conflict between Iran and the West. They're seeing that there is no path for negotiation with West. There is no path for some sort of a better relationship with West. And do you believe that those people, I know that in Russia and Iran, we have those people who are arguing that they want a better relationship. But are these people getting weaker in these two countries, or somehow they continue in the same sort of leverage they had before? How is that going to change their position?
I'm not sure about Iran, but I'm quite sure that in Russia, there isn't really any appreciation for for the fact that uh, you know negotiating with the West could produce good results. That message is falling on deaf ears, and it's pretty simple. It's like, well, show us show us a good result, any good result, anytime. Show us where negotiating with the West has given us what we want. And so what they see is attempts by the West to turn everything to its advantage and to Russia's disadvantage. And I'm pretty sure that it's the same with Iran. With Iran, it's even more obvious because there was years of negotiating a deal, and then Trump decided in his first term well, I won't have any of that, and it fell apart. So once he did that, his ability to negotiate further deals with Iran was zeroed out for all time. I don't know if he understands that. I don't know if Trump's handlers understand that, but he has absolutely no ability to negotiate anything with Iran.
Yeah. There are two countries. They're so interesting when you look at their position, you look at their foreign policy, Japan and South Korea. And Russia yesterday protested Japan's participation in US military drills near its borders. But we know that after all, Japan is somehow, I would say, somehow sovereign nation, and they know what to do with their foreign policy somehow. And how do you see the move on this, on the part of these two countries, when it comes to this sort of conflict between the East and the West? The United States on one hand, and the East could be Russia, China, Iran on the other hand. Where do they want to stand, in your opinion, in a long run?
Well, they're horrified. Um, Japan is horrified because it sees the U.S. on 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 whom it depends very much. Not so much as a friend anymore, but as a sort of frenemy, because the United States is doing things that are not to Japan's advantage at all. It it greatly disadvantages Japan because Japan's nearest neighbor that can provide it with energy is Russia. So souring the relationship with Russia is a very good way of hampering the Japanese economy, driving up costs, making it non-competitive, etc. And so, from the point of view of the Japanese, having Russia as a friend would be much more conducive to further economic development than having Russia as an enemy. Uh, the the South Koreans at this point are absolutely horrified by the fact that just to the north of them, Kim Jong Un is now building intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, and can pretty much uh, hold the United States completely hostage at will. And he's not somebody that the Americans can negotiate with because, again, Trump has tried that and was found to be ridiculous. So I don't think he's going to get any response from North Korea at all, and the Americans are afraid to go anywhere near it at this point. Um, eh, Trump keeps sending these love letters to Kim Jong Un, like, "Hey, buddy, let's be friends. Let's let bygones be bygones," and those letters get returned unopened. So Trump is very badly jilted by his buddy Kim Jong Un, whom he thought was a great guy, and South Koreans are absolutely horrified by the whole spectacle of that because it just basically points out their absolute defenselessness because the United States can't defend them and they can't defend themselves. Um, and so what are they to do? They only exist because the United States fought the North against China and Russia. Uh, a frozen conflict, not even a victory, a long time ago. So they're very afraid that that conflict becomes unfrozen. That would not be to South Korea's advantage at all.
We know that Donald Trump came to office and he somehow was concerned about BRICS. But looking at the way that he's dealing with BRICS, we had the officials of South Africa visiting the United States, and when when it comes to the BRICS summit, they don't much talk about it in the mainstream media. But you see, Donald Trump is somehow attacking Brazil. They're trying to influence, they're trying to somehow convince the people who voted for Lula that this is not the president who represents you. You need someone else, maybe more, maybe closer to Washington. He knows what he's talking about. He's talking about the Bolsonaro here in Brazil. He wants somebody that is close to the United States. That it, in my opinion, it's all about BRICS and the BRICS agenda and the BRICS plan for the future. Because Lula, somehow, the way that Lula is leading the foreign policy of Brazil is totally against, in the eyes of the United States, totally against the United States. How do you feel the way that Donald Trump is dealing with BRICS? And how influential this sort of movement toward South Africa? We know that how they attacked South Africa, they said, then I don't know, they're against the white people in South Africa, all of these issues they brought up. Maybe there has some sort of reality to those arguments, but bringing these things up to manipulate the situation in South Africa. With Brazil, they're doing the same. Argentina is just out of discussion because they're just in the hand of the United States with the new president. But how Russia, China, and Iran are not that much manipulative for the United States, but they can do something. It seems that they're trying to do something with Brazil and South Africa. You're taking that and the way that the Trump administration, or Donald Trump himself, is dealing with BRICS.
Well, I think that Trump understands that all of these BRICS nations trading with each other in their own currencies, not using the dollar or the euro. The euro is sort of a mini me to the US dollar. Uh, he sees that that basically drains the power away from the US financial system and will seriously interfere with the ability of the United States to run structural trade deficits and to continuously borrow money from the rest of the world. And that ability is dwindling. Now, that makes him just really mad when he hears the word BRICS. It's sort of it's sort of a kind of a at this point he's like a dog that's trained to bark at the word bricks. Bricks, Fido, bricks, woof woof. And so that's what happened in South Africa. That's what happened in Brazil. And of course his reaction to something he doesn't like is sanctions. 100%, 500% sanctions. uh, he's sort of like he only has one song in his mind, and the word to that song is sanctions. Um, and so that's what happened. Now with Bolsonaro, that's a personal thing because Bolsonaro, um, uh, I guess, found the right way uh, to um, to flatter Trump, and he likes being flattered. And Lula is not interested in flattering Trump, so Trump doesn't like that. I think it's just petty activity going on.
What is Dmitry, if we assume that Donald Trump and his administration in is interested in making MAGA, in making America great again, don't you feel that the sanctions, the tariffs, all these policies, as Donald Trump himself was mentioning before being elected in the United States, are somehow they're doing so much damage to the economy of the United States that even they cannot fix it in the near future, but they're trying in order to somehow uh, deal with it, they're trying to double down, triple down on the sort of sanctions, tariffs. How is that going to be reasonable in the mind of someone like Scott Bessent in the United States? Do you think that he is the guy that running the show, or Donald Trump is running the show? Why these political people are running the show? These not some economists behind the scene uh, thinking about the issue of sanctions and tariffs.
I really don't think anybody is running the show except Trump, who's ruling by decree. He keeps signing these presidential orders, and the courts pretty much said, okay, well, let him do whatever he wants. The Supreme Court said that he has executive control. Congress has been pretty well sidelined. Nothing is being legislated that is significant to fixing the problem. Um, and Trump is Mr. Random. He's Mr. Random Walk. Everything depends on the last Fox News style video that he's watched. His mind seems to be volatile. Let's put it that way, and his attention span, uh, needs a lot of attention. Um, so we have a lot of randomness going on, and yes, these these sanctions that are imposed and then postponed and then negotiated, and then the deal is broken almost immediately, and something else is offered. Um, that is incredibly destructive of existing economic relationships. And what it really is going to cause is the United States to become isolated, to become economically and politically isolated. And those relationships, once broken, are very difficult to get back. And I think that one thing that we should look forward to is high inflation in the United States. The dollar is already dropping, gold is already going through the roof, now silver is going through the roof. Those are all replacements for the US dollar, by the way. That those prices going up, commodity prices going up, and precious metals is all the result of the US dollar sort of being a bad risk, becoming a bad risk. So we should expect much more of that. And it's a big boat, so it takes a long time to get it rocking, but Trump is doing pretty well with that.
I don't know if you watched the interview that the CEO of Ford Motors did, and he was talking about how they're behind China in the case of EV and in the case of car production, and how they connected the tech to the car production. And he was talking about Huawei, Xiaomi, they're just connected, everything connected. But in the United States, he was somehow putting the blame on Google and Apple because they're not interested to bring their technology to the car production. It seems that looking at the economy and, for example, the car production in the United States, they're just putting all their eggs in the basket of the military industrial complex. There is no concentration on other fields, other areas. Do you feel that would change in the United States, or we're not going to see any sort of change? Just endless wars going to continue as the main policy, as the main, I would argue, domestic. You look at the Congress. You look at Lindsey Graham to get together with Blumenthal. It's all about tariffs and sanctions and new wars when it comes to Ukraine. And these people should talk about what's going on with the economy, what's going on with the technology, what's going on with the car production. But they're not doing that. They're seeking something else. What's is that? Can they fix it, in your opinion?
Can they figure out how to get kickbacks from something other than defense contractors? I don't know. But their method of getting kickbacks from defense contractors seems well established and foolproof. And their biggest fear is that uh, this weapons money will stop flowing. They'll do anything to make sure that the weapons manufacturers get some money. It doesn't matter whether the stuff they make is at all useful or junk or overpriced, and as long as they get that money, get those kickbacks, and the entire political system, congressional political system in Washington is predicated on defense contractor kickbacks. So you're asking them to do something productive, whereas they've been honing their skills to do something ultimately unproductive for their entire careers. And these are all old people who never get, replaced with someone younger and smarter. I don't think there's not much of a chance of that.
No. Thank you so much, Dmitry, for being with us today. Before wrapping up this session, let us know about your website.
Yes, it's boosty.to/Club Orlov. I'm working on an article that explains how Trump has actually arrived at a winning combination. You might think that Trump isn't really winning a lot of battles these days, but I think just by pure dumb luck, he came up with something quite workable for a change, workable at least for him, for his person. So I hope you go to the website and read up on it. A lot more detail can be squeezed into an article on the blog than into an hour of me talking. So please go there.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. See you soon. Have a great time
Thank
there.
you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.